Chapter 44. The Chart. Had you followed Captain Ahab into his cabin after the squall that took place on the night succeeding the wild ratification of his purpose with his crew, you would have seen him go to a locker in the transom, and, bringing out a large wrinkled roll of yellowish sea charts, spread them before him on his screwed-down table. Then, seating himself before it, you would have seen him intently study the various lines and shadings where they met his eye, and with slow but steady pencil trace additional courses over the spaces that before were blank. At intervals he would refer to piles of old logbooks beside him, wherein were set down the seasons and places in which, on the various former voyages of various ships, sperm whales had been captured or seen. While thus employed, the heavy pewter lamp suspended in chains over his head continually rocked with the motion of the ship, and forever threw shifting gleams and shadows of lines upon his wrinkled brow, till almost seemed that while he himself was marking out lines and courses on the wrinkled charts, some invisible pencil was also tracing lines and courses upon the deeply marked chart of his forehead. But it was not this night in particular, in the solitude of his cabin, Ahab thus pondered over his charts. Almost every night they were brought out. Almost every night some pencil marks were effaced and others were submitted. For with the charts of all four oceans before him, Ahab was threading a maze of currents and eddies, with a view to the more certain accomplishment of that monomaniacal thought of his soul. Now, to anyone not fully acquainted with the ways of leviathans, it may seem an absurdly hopeless task thus to seek out one solitary creature in the unhooped oceans of the planet. But not so did it seem to Ahab, who knew all the sets of all the tides and currents, and thereby calculating the driftings of the sperm whale's food, and also calling to mind the regular ascertained seasons for hunting him in particular latitudes, could arrive at a reasonable surmises, at almost approaching certainties concerning the timeliest day to be upon this or that ground in search of his prey. So assured indeed is the fact concerning the periodicalness of the sperm whale's resorting to given waters that many hunters believe that, could he be closely observed and studied throughout the world, there were logs for one voyage of the entire whale fleet carefully collated, then the migrations of the sperm whale would be found to correspond invariably to those of the herring shoals or flights of swallows. On this hint, attempts have been made to construct elaborate migratory charts of sperm whales. Since the above was written, the statement is happily borne out by an official circular issued by Lieutenant Maury of the National Observatory, Washington, April 16, 1851. By that circular, it appears that precisely such a chart in course of completion, and portions of it are pressed in the circular. The chart divides the ocean into districts of 5 degrees of latitude by 5 degrees of longitude, perpendicularly through each of which districts are 12 columns for the 12 months, and horizontally through each of which districts there are 3 lines, one to show the number of days that have been spent in each month in every district, and the 2 others to show the number of days in which whales, sperm or right, have been seen. Besides, when making a passage from one feeding ground to another, the sperm whales, guided by some infallible instinct, say rather secret intelligence from the deity, mostly swim in veins, as are they called, continuing their way along a given ocean line with such undeviating exactitude that no ship ever sailed her course by any chart with 1/10 of such a marvelous precision. Though in these cases the directions taken by any one whale be as straight as a surveyor's parallel, and though the lines of advance be strictly confined to its own unavoidable straight wake, yet the arbitrary vein in which these times he is said to swim generally embraces some few miles in width, more or less as the vein is presumed to expand and contract, but never exceeds the visual sweep from the whale ship's mastheads when the circumspecting gliding along this magic zone. The sum is that at particular seasons within that breadth and along that path, migrating whales may with great confidence be looked for. And hence not only at substantiated times upon well-known separate feeding grounds could Ahab hope to encounter his prey, but in crossing the widest expanses of water between those grounds he could, by his art, so place and time himself on his way, and even then not to be wholly without prospect of a meeting. There was a circumstance in which the first sight seemed to entangle his delirious but still methodical scheme. But not so the reality, perhaps. Though the gregarious sperm whales have their regular seasons for particular grounds, yet in general you cannot conclude that the herds which haunted such and such a latitude or longitude this year will turn out to be identically the same with those who were found there in the preceding season, though there are peculiar and unquestionable instances where the contrary of this is proved true. In general, the same remark, only within a less wide limit, applies to the solitaries and hermits among the matured aged sperm whales. So that though Moby Dick had in a former year been seen, for example, on what is called the Seychelles Ground in the Indian Ocean, or Volcano Bay on the Japanese coast, yet did not follow that were the Pequod to visit either of those spots at any subsequent corresponding season, she would infallibly encounter him there. So too with some other feeding grounds where he had at times revealed himself. But all these seemed only his casual stopping places and ocean inns, so to speak, not his places of prolonged abode. And where Ahab's chances of accomplishing his object have hitherto been spoken of, allusion has only been made to whatever wayside antecedent extra prospects were his, ere a particular set time or place were attained, when all possibilities would become probabilities, and, as Ahab fondly thought, every possibility the next thing to a certainty. That particular set time and place were conjured in the one technical phrase, the season on the line. For there and then, for several consecutive years, Moby Dick had been periodically described lingering in those waters for a while, as the sun in its annual round loiters for a predicted interval in any one sign of the zodiac. There it was, too, that most of the deadly encounters with the white whale had taken place. There the waves were storied with his deeds. There also was that tragic spot where the monomaniac old man had found the awful motive to his vengeance. But in the cautious comprehensiveness and unloitering vigilance with which Ahab threw his brooding soul into this unfaltering hunt, he would not permit himself to rest all his hopes upon the crowning fact above mentioned. However flattering it might be to the hopes, nor in the sleeplessness of his vow could he so tranquilize his unquiet heart as to postpone all intervening quest. Now the Pequod had sailed from Nantucket at the very beginning of the season on the line. No possible endeavor could enable her commander to make the great passage southwards, double the Cape Horn, and then, running down 60 degrees of latitude, arrive in the equatorial Pacific in time to cruise there. Therefore he must wait for the next ensuing season. Yet the premature hour of the Pequod sailing had perhaps been correctly selected by Ahab with a view to this very complexion of things, because an interval of 365 days and nights were before him, an interval which, instead of impatiently enduring ashore, he would spend in a miscellaneous hunt. If by chance the white whale, spending his vacation in seas far remote from his periodic feeding grounds, should turn up his wrinkled brow off the Persian Gulf or in the Bengal Bay or China Seas or in any other waters haunted by his race, so that monsoons, pampas, nor'westers, harmatins, trades, and any wind but the Levanter and Simoon might blow Moby Dick into the devious zigzag world circle of the Pequod's circumnavigating wake. But granting all this, yet regarded discreetly and coolly, it seems not but a mad idea this, that in the broad, boundless ocean one solitary whale, even if encountered, should be thought capable of individual recognition from his hunter, even as the white-bearded mufti in the thronged thoroughfares of Constantinople. Yes, for the peculiar snow-white brow of Moby Dick and his snow-white hump could not be mistakable. And I have not yet tallied the whale, Ahab would mutter to himself, as, after poring over his charts till long after midnight, he would throw himself back in reveries. Tallied him, and shall he escape? His broad fins are bored and scalloped out like lost sheep's ear. And here his mad mind would run in breathless race till a weariness and faintness of pondering came over him, and in the open air of the deck he would seem to recover his strength. Ah, God, what trances of torments does that man endure who is consumed with the one unachievable revengeful desire! He sleeps with clenched hands and wakes with his own bloody nails in his palms. Often, when forced from his hammock by exhaustion and intolerably vivid dreams of the night, which, resuming his own intense thoughts through the day, carried them on amid a clashing of frenzies, and whirled them round and round and round in his blazing brain, till the very throbbing of his life spot became insufferable anguish. And when, as was sometimes the case, these spiritual throes in him heaved his being up from its base, and a chasm seemed opening in him, from which forked flames and lightning shot up, and accursed fiends beckoned him to leap down among them. When this hell in himself yawned beneath him, a wild cry would be heard through the ship, and with glaring eyes Ahab would burst from his stateroom, as though escaping from a bed that was on fire. Yet these, perhaps, instead of being the unsuppressible symptoms of some latent weakness or fright in his own resolve, were but the plainest tokens of its intensity. For at such times crazy Ahab, the scheming, unappeasingly steadfast hunter of the white whale, this Ahab that had gone to his hammock, was not the agent that so caused him to burst from it in horror again. The latter was eternal, living principle or soul in him, and in sleep, being for the time disassociated with the characterizing mind, which at other times employed it for his outer vehicle or agent, it spontaneously sought escape from the scorching contiguity of the frantic thing, of which for a time it was no longer integral. But the mind does not exist unless leagued with the soul, and therefore it must have been that, in Ahab's case, yielding up all his thoughts and fancies to his one supreme purpose, that purpose, by its own sheer inveteracy of will, forced itself against gods and devils into a kind of self-assumed, independent being of its own. Nay, could grimly live and burn, while the common vitality to which the conjoined fled horror-stricken from the unbidden and unfathered birth. Therefore the tormented spirit that glared out of bodily eyes when it seemed Ahab rushed from his room was for the time but vacated thing, a formless somnambulistic being, a ray of living light to be sure, but without an object to color, and therefore a blankness in itself. God help thee, old man, thy thoughts have created a creature in thee, and he whose intense thinking thus makes him a Prometheus. A vulture feeds upon that heart forever, that vulture the very creature he creates. This is the end of chapter 44. So Ahab was checking over his charts, and he has a whole bunch of old charts, People went out to sea and they sketched where the land was, they sketched where islands were, they put in various different things. And on his charts, he has logs of where the whale has been spotted, where Moby Dick has been spotted, and places to generally hunt whales. And so he has this whole thing planned out of, okay, this is where Moby Dick usually lingers. He's occasionally spotted here and occasionally spotted there. And so he has this whole thing worked out of, like, this is where he is in the summer, and this is where he is in the winter, and this is the route he goes between the two spaces. And so he has all this worked out. Now, there's a normal whaling season. As it said, there's the normal whaling season where all of the whales go from one general area over to another general area. It's miles and miles wide. And just this flow of whales, big, huge whales, just whole bunches of them, going in a big long line from one feeding ground to another feeding ground, or from the feeding ground to a mating ground where big whales make little whales. Anyway, so they have this set course, and between what he's recorded in his logbooks, what other captains have recorded in their logbooks, and information he's gotten from previous places, it's like, okay, this is here and this is there. And they said this ship has been around and sailing for 50 or 60. This ship, the Pequod, has been out at sea for a long, long time under various different captains. And, Ahab is the most recent. But he has logbooks of the previous captains, and he has maps of the previous captains. And he has been trading information with other people when he's on shore. So he has this all planned out, and every day, every night, he goes through and checks it off. Though he has no new information, and everything in there is in there. it's like he's looking at it and hoping to get a change, and it's like the whale might be here, and he's just obsessed with this at this point because he's constantly going over the thing. Poker. Okay. When people play cards, they one of the tells that you can tell that people are thinking hard about their cards is they keep checking them. And it's like, if I take a look at my hand, I have pair of deuces, pair of twos. And the bids go up, and I'm going to look at the pair of twos even though I know I have a pair of twos. And it's like, I know that I have it, but I want to check it just to make sure. And even in other card games, people do this sort of thing. Bridge players check, shuffle their cards, put them in order. My grandmother played duplicate bridge, where you play the same hand twice. One hand goes this way and one hand goes that way. And people who play duplicate bridge often don't order their cards. So, when you open up your cards, you put all the clubs together and the hearts together and the spades together and the diamonds together. They don't do that because once you see somebody ordering their cards, you know how their hand is ordered, and oh, they probably have 5 of one thing or 3 of another. And because it's duplicate bridge and you've seen the cards that they have, you know what they have. So it can be very tricky. And people can get really weird with, constantly checking things over and rechecking them. And yeah. So that's one of the tells for cards. A lot of people won't pick up on it, or it's a thing that people start picking up on at an intermediate level. There's different levels of skills in playing cards and for different games, and some of the skills carry over and some of the skills don't. Telling when somebody's fidgety or looking at their cards going, I need a 7 of spades, or they're shuffling their hands around. Gin is a perfect game for this, because with gin, it's you have the 10 cards, and sometimes they may be going for one thing, and if they abandon it, they'll reshuffle their hands, because let's say if they're going for a straight and they decide, no, I'm not going to get the straight of 4, but I can pick up a 4 of a kind, and then I just need 2 3 of a kinds. So, things like that, they may reshuffle. And once they start reshuffling, you can kind of tell, oh, they're changing their strategy here. So that's like an intermediate level of skill. And then at the advanced level of skill, people just don't look at their cards. They glance at their cards once and that's it. And they have memorized and they count every single card in the deck, and that's advanced level. But intermediate level, you start playing not just, oh, this is what I need, or this is the plot to win these tricks. You start looking at how the other people are playing the game, and then you start trying to beat the person as well as beating their hand. So there's it's one of those different things. But this is kind of a tell for Ahab, because he keeps going back to these charts and going back to these charts. And it's like every night, almost every night, it said, almost every night he goes to the charts and he goes to the logbooks and he sleeps. And he sleeps fitfully. And his fingernails dig into his hands because he has his fists clenched. And I know that when I stress sleep, sometimes my arms get all tense and I wake up like sore and from just like stress, cringing, and sleep. But anyway, that's chapter 44.